when people show up to work and they say, I'm a human being and here's what's going on in my life and here are the things that I'm struggling with, but here's how I'm going to work on the solution, I think ultimately that builds a lot of trust, and trust is integral to any team's success.
Okay, so welcome to Divergent. This is the podcast from The Mix, when we look at uncovering the personal stories and journeys of the people behind the brands that we all know and love. My name is Gemma Mitchell. I'm the Managing Director of The Mix. Can you give us a bit of an introduction, Michelle?
Yes, of course. My name is Michelle Riband. I lead the go-to-market strategy and activations team at Mozilla. And I grew up in Switzerland, but spent many years working in the US and working across various tech companies, tech jobs in the marketing and communication space.
Thank you so much, Michelle, joining us in a very sunny Berlin, which is very exciting. Okay, so first question, easy question. Are companies getting better or worse at understanding people and their consumers, in your opinion?
Yeah, I definitely think that companies are getting better because we have more tools available to us now. So when we think about different types of consumer research, people have been going out into the streets to talk to people for a very long time, but we now have a lot more data analytics tools and measurement tools that enable us to understand our businesses and consumers and the market landscape in different ways. So I think we're definitely better at aggregating information and data. I think it's a case-by-case basis whether or not organizations are good at actually integrating those insights into the business in a meaningful way, because having insights and leveraging insights are two completely different things.
Tell me about the difference.
So, we can have internal research teams, we can hire armies of agencies, and we live in an information economy where data is everywhere and data is power. But being able to distill data and insights into meaningful strategic recommendations that enter into an organization and influence the right people in order to shape product development, marketing strategy, and just general market positioning, they're different things. So when I think about successful research teams, successful research agencies, it's really about how you tell the story. And it's about leveraging data storytelling in a way that resonates within the organization, in a way that actually can shape business strategy.
Can you tell me a bit about that? Because I think one of your gifts as an amazing client of ours is your stakeholder management kind of capabilities. How does that feel for you from a day-to-day point of view? Like once you've got the research in and you have to sell it in, what's the most effective way of doing that for your stakeholders? Yeah,
for sure. Well, in the world that we live in today, where people are communicating in the workplace in a lot of different ways, you've got Slack, you've got email, you've got Zoom. It's really tough to get people's attention. And so the first important challenge is to make sure that the right people are seeing the content, not just getting sent an 100-page deck, which they may or may not read, but actually sitting with them and making sure that they can deep dive into the work, ask questions, and that there's space for strategic workshops where all the right people in my organization, that's product, finance, data science, marketing, communications, internal research stakeholders, bringing them all together around a table to say, what does this actually mean for us? And how do we shape our roadmap according to those insights? I will also say that timing is everything. And there are certain moments in the year where planning happens or where reflections on business performance happen. And so timing insights to kind of fit into those existing processes is also another way to make it easier for them to get embedded into the work that's already happening.
Is it quite difficult to get that timing right? Because sometimes you kind of need the buy-in, before you can get the stuff commissioned, and then you're already sort of behind because you don't necessarily have the consumer answer. Is that a challenge, or is that something that's kind of factored into that time planning?
Yeah, figuring out timing is always challenging. and processes change, I think what you just said is really critical. So before starting any sort of consumer research project, you need to make sure that the right people are bought into the brief. So what are the questions that we're trying to answer? What's the methodology that we're going to use? And what are the markets? Who are the audiences? So before even kicking off any research project, we need to make sure that the right people are bought in, because that means when the insights come a month, 2 months, 3 months down the road, regardless of the timing, people are waiting for it and people are excited about it and they're bought into it. I think it's a lot harder to sell insights into an organization when it's kind of coming from out of left field and people haven't felt involved in the process.
That kind of feeds in. I was going to ask you that question because you mentioned just that notion of getting the time with people to be able to sit with them and really sort of get into the work with them and have that opportunity to kind of sit side by side so you can really apply it to what they're facing. How easy is it to get time with people?
It's hard, especially the way that we work today. We sit in front of our computers and we sit on Zoom and people have back-to-back meetings. And I think that's why organizational effectiveness is really built on trust. And so when you enter into an organization as a new person, investing in those relationships across the business, getting to know each other, building that trust, working on things collaboratively is really important so that when you have other projects that come down the pipeline, those people already have the context, they already know you, they'll be more receptive to working together. And ultimately, communication and clarity is everything. So if you want somebody's time, you have to be really clear on what it is that you want from them and why this is valuable to them and to the business and what the outcome is. So if you and I are going to sit and spend 60 minutes on a workshop around how we should build a brief for our research agency, it's really important that I give you that context up front and that it's really clear what we're going to spend that time on. And as kind of a broader point on the way that we work today, we were all forced to go into full remote work during COVID. But not all organizations are good at asynchronous communication or at structured, streamlined virtual communication, right? So setting up all the really tight agendas and processes and notes and share outs and all of those processes and frameworks are really important so that you're using your time efficiently and so that when you and I walk into a meeting, we know what we're doing. If this is a workshop meeting about consumer research, we know what we're getting ourselves into, and I'm setting you up for success to be the most valuable partner possible.
Have you seen any examples where a business has really adopted insight and put it to good use? What are your favorite examples?
My favorite examples. We had a recent example in Mozilla where we launched our Mozilla VPN in August 2020 in 6 markets. And it was our first time launching this product, and we launched it in English and in US dollars in those markets. And then 6 months later, we decided to bring Mozilla VPN to Germany and France. And our product team is based out of the US, and we did a big research project with TheMix, actually, to really help us understand how do we launch this product in a meaningful way in these new markets. And some of the key insights that came out of that research is we have to launch with euros, we have to launch with PayPal, because credit cards are not a commonly used payment method here in Europe, and we have to think about variable pricing. So not just having one subscription plan option, but actually building multiple plan options because people want choice. And I use this micro example because it was a really clear moment in time where we took the perspective of the consumer, shaped product development, and actually brought our product to market in a very different way. And we shaped our communications and marketing around what people in the market were interested in. And so it was a nice example of actually being able to influence that go-to-market strategy.
Just on that, I guess, just tying that into the stakeholder management side of things, I presume there were maybe some people that just were convinced that we could launch an identical thing in the different markets.
Yeah, this is the challenge of having a global organization, there's always a trade-off between, on the one hand, what are the economies of scale that we get from launching things, similar things in multiple markets at the same time, versus how do we adapt for cultural nuance, for regional nuance, so that we are maximizing success. And that's often an education process. And so in a global organization on the European team, part of our job is to think about gathering regional insights so that we're thinking differently about consumers in the different markets. And in my career, I have sat in global headquarters in California. I used to work at Facebook, and that's an extremely global business, but a lot of the kind of strategic decisions are centralized in the headquarters, even though we would travel all around the world for research to do in-person focus groups and really try to understand the markets. And now it's a different situation. Our headquarters is in California, but I'm based in a regional office, and that's a very different relationship to have with stakeholders. So I really see a big part of my job is helping to translate what's the regional opportunity, what do regional consumers want, advocating for the fact that there is market nuance, and trying to help the organization find a balance between maximizing our resources and being efficient with how we're spending our time and our money, but then also making sure that we're investing in all of those product adaptations and unique marketing for different markets and different audiences.
Yeah, it kind of feels like the key difference between almost having a product in lots of global markets versus operating globally.
Definitely.
What are the barriers that get in the way of understanding people in businesses?
From all the research that I've done, I have learned that, especially in the tech world, people are often lazy. And I include myself in that. We like what is a default, and it's difficult to change behavior. So I used to work on messaging apps, and it's very difficult to get people from one messaging app to another because of network effects. And so you have your whole network on one messaging platform, and all of a sudden, one person is trying to get you to switch to Telegram. You're like, oh, it's such a drag. I have to download an app and do all these things. And people don't necessarily like change, and they find it inconvenient and tiresome. And a very specific example in my life is we look at the US, which is an iOS dominant market. It's about 50% iOS. And I used to have an iPhone. And when I quit my job, I was like, I'm not going to spend $1,000 on an iPhone. I'm about to travel around the world as a budget backpacker. I have to go cheap. So I bought an Android and have had an Android device ever since. And now I live in Europe, and it's a 70% Android market. And I can't talk to my friends in the US because they're fixated on iMessage, and they refuse to switch to WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger. And I can't switch that behavior. So the key point here is that it's hard to make people change what are their core or default behaviors, even if they're well-intentioned. The other important point, I think, is that marketing is successful, and that can sometimes be scary. And as a marketer, I feel very strongly about marketing products that I believe in. And that's ultimately why I came to Mozilla. And I worked for a time in the food and beverage industry, and I remember the CEO of Pepsi telling the company that people don't always listen to science. They listen to marketing, and they listen to what they believe. So how is a deep-fried piece of kale actually healthier than a deep-fried potato? I mean, they're both deep-fried. So the health benefit is really negligible. But kale chips, as part of, this kind of health movement and vegan food, and kale is a superfood, all of a sudden, deep-fried kale chips were showing up everywhere, and consumers were believing that they were making healthy choices because they were eating kale. And so in that example, what the science was telling us, right? Deep fried food, regardless of what it is unhealthy, was different than what people were choosing to believe, because marketing was telling them that if they bought these kale chips in a nice organic brown packaging with, green logo, that was actually them making a better decision for their bodies. So I think point number one is that it's difficult to change people's default behavior because people can be averse to change. And point number two is people don't always know the facts or believe the facts. They believe what's presented to them in the most compelling and in the most emotional way. And so as consumers, we all have to be careful and cognizant of what we're consuming and how. And as companies, we have to be ethical about how we present information to people in a fair and honest way.
I'm going to cough. Just give me a second. Desperately try not to cough right in your ear. To talk about you specifically, so you, I would say, are a champion, I think that's fair, of making human-led decisions, kind of being informed by consumer behaviour. Are there any traits that you've used to help you galvanise other people in the business to come on that journey with you?
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge that I am not always going to be the same as the end consumer. And so, I happen to have worked at companies where I relate to the consumer and where I actively use the product. But as a marketer, a lot of times, people are falsely assuming that what they believe and what they experience should be translated into the general consumer experience. And that's very dangerous because it means that we're making product decisions, business decisions, marketing decisions based off how we feel, based off of a case study of one, and not based off of how real people actually use the product. And so when we talk about galvanizing consumer research or really representing the voice of the consumer, I think the first important point is to define the consumer, and oftentimes define the consumer as someone different than ourselves. It's not, I use Pocket, our content saving platform. I use Pocket in this way, and therefore we should start emphasizing the save features. No, we spoke to a representative sample of people in our target market, and the insights show X, Y, Z. And so trying to make it as objective and fact-based as possible so that as a business organization, we're making informed decisions, not personal or biased decisions.
It's always so hard, isn't it? There's that notion of you don't want to stop people feeling like they've got a good hunch for something, but trying to remove that notion of the sample of one as the truth.
Yeah, and we've all been there. There's confirmation bias every time we make a decision, every time we read an article or we do anything, we're validating our own path. And, you've worked weeks on a strategy deck and you think this is the right path forward, and you get this great research project finished, and it's our brain's own tendency to pick out the facts that support the conclusion that we all want. And it's so hard to fight against your own natural urge to cherry pick and to seek out that confirmation bias. And, the quest for objectivity is really challenging. So the most important thing is if people value research and if they understand research methodologies, you're in a much better place to have a conversation with different stakeholders, because everyone will at least try to leave their biases, their egos, their hunches at the door to be able to have a objective conversation. Ultimately, if you look at someone like Steve Jobs, he fundamentally believed that people don't know what they want. You can't go ask them, what's the next big technological innovation that you're looking for. So I don't think that we are always asking consumers for the answer. I think we're asking consumers for the inputs so that smart, informed, motivated people can get into a room and combine objective facts and insights with strategic vision and some of those kind of business hunches to get to the right path forward. So I'm not trying to imply that all business decisions must be based off of objective facts. But I think when we look at research, we have to be honest about the value of research and making sure that we are seeing consumer opinion for consumer opinion and not for our opinion, and then letting that shape the magic of product innovation and product development.
I think that's such an interesting point, because I think that's, if I really think about it, that's almost one of our biggest frustrations agency side, is this notion. So either you're battling the guys that have got the hunch and it's like pushing a boulder, trying to get them to kind of see a different opinion. But on the flip side of that, you then often get the people that are almost too ready to get the answer from consumers. And we get that a lot when we're talking about big kind of quant samples, is they'll really want to ask the strategic question in the questionnaire, like take it to consumers, and then you get the answer back on that and it'll kill something flat. And it's like, that's not the way to get to the answer. It's that sort of sense, use it as input, use it as fuel for this kind of strategic conversation. I totally agree, because otherwise you just end up in a really lopsided place. Like you'll never get the answer from them.
Yeah, no, exactly. People don't know what they want all the time. People know how they're living their lives. They know how they're using the products that they have today. They know, whether or not they stood in Times Square and remember seeing a billboard for Coca-Cola. They remember and can speak about the way that they perceive their own lives and perceive themselves. There's also inherent bias in their answers because it's all self-reported. But I don't think it's fair to ask people to do your job for you, right? Your job, regardless of whether you're, building the next Disney film or building the next innovative tech product, or, you're doing PR consulting, your job is to figure out the path forward and to figure out the strategic vision. And so that's your job, and you need to gather all the data and all the insights that you can, and all the training and all the expertise, so that you come to the table with the best position to make the go forward plan.
Amazing. Let's talk about you a little bit more. So how has the business of being a leader changed for you over the course of your career?
So I think that leadership shows up in a lot of different ways. And when I was in high school, I was captain of the volleyball team, and I was a leader in that space. And when I started my career, I was an intern. I was not in my title a leader, but I really think you can still act as a leader and be a leader even if you're not in the role of manager, CEO, XYZ important person, because I think leadership is how you show up every day, in how you think about the big picture and how you bring people together and how you communicate effectively to drive a path forward. Whether that's, hey, we're on a team together and we're going to build cohesion so that we can have the best attitude as we tackle this new game. Maybe we won, maybe we lost, but your role is to kind of bring everyone together. And so I think that I've been a leader in many different ways throughout my life, regardless of whether or not I had that title. I think the recent transition that I've been making in my career is, what's the distinction between a manager and a leader? And a lot of people talk about this, and a lot of business books talk about this. And the fundamental difference being, as a manager, you are, managing others to help them do their work. And to me, as you transition to being a leader, you have to learn how to take a step back and to not always jump in when there's a problem, but empower your people to do their best work and to learn and fail on their own. And that your role is to kind of run ahead and shine a torch for the path forward and empower everyone and give everyone the tools and the skills and the support when necessary to go forward on that path. And that's challenging, especially for a perfectionist like me. If you're managing people that have done a job that you once did, you know exactly how you want that deck to be formatted, or how you would run that meeting, or how you would present that information. And there's a tendency to want to jump in and solve it or do it or fix it. And it's important and difficult to resist that urge and to really try to take a step back and say, my role here is to set up the bigger picture. My role here is to connect the right people, to bring the right resources in, to address issues if they come up and remove roadblocks. My role here is not to roll my sleeves up every time there's an issue and try to be the firefighter every time. And I think that's a transition, and I think people continue to get better at that over the course of their career. And as people gain seniority, I think they transition from manager to leader to role model. And that is a place that I want to be one day, that people see me as someone that they want to emulate, and that becomes more than a source of just professional support, but a source of kind of broader inspiration for, this is how I want to lead my life, or this is how I want to structure my career or my work-life balance.
What's the difference between, what do you think that junction is? Because I think that you've amazingly articulated that kind of gap between manager and leader. I was once had someone describe it to me. They'd stepped into being a managing director, having had a managing director leave, and she was incredibly paranoid because, having been in the team, she knew that everyone had described the person who was leaving as a little bit lazy. And so she really didn't want to appear as lazy. But actually, the more you sit in those leadership jobs, it is that sense that you can't be the person rolling up your sleeves, and that sometimes you just have to, is it laziness, or are you making space because you've got to spend time on the other stuff? And I think that's something that people often get caught up with in that leadership space, is how your team then see how you spend your time. It's a really tricky balance.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, we've all had that experience where somebody waltzes into the meeting, someone more senior than you waltzes in and drops some pieces of feedback and then waltzes out, and you're like, well, wait a second. That doesn't feel helpful. And I think that's why people respect you when you invest and when you care. And that doesn't mean you're doing the work, but it means that you're asking the right questions and that you're really interested in both of them as individuals, but also in what they're doing. And I think that it's also a path of acceptance, right? I was having a conversation with one of my coworkers, and she started as a copywriter. And so she is used to making things, especially for people that are in the creative space. I think this is really challenging. If you're used to building things and making things, if you then rise into a management or a leadership position, you're not writing the copy anymore, and you're not designing the ads anymore. And that's the way it goes, and you need to decide if that's the path that you want for yourself. And this idea of letting go becomes really important, but your team will still respect you and view you as someone that's really engaged if you're setting a vision that is based off an informed understanding of their skill set, on what it takes to do that kind of work, on, this kind of understanding that I've been there, and therefore I'm going to set a vision for you and set deadlines for you, or get additional resources for you in a way that's realistic. That said, as you rise in your career, you start to manage people that are doing things that you've never done before. And as an example, I was trained as a product marketing manager. And so my team, my initial team here is product marketing managers. So it's very much like, I've done this work and now I'm going to do it at a more senior level and a more strategic level. I recently took over a second team, the activations team, and they do things I've never done before. I'm not a paid marketer. I've worked with agencies before, but I've never worked on media strategy with agencies before. Same with email strategy. I've worked on emails and made those kind of strategies as part of bigger marketing plans, but I'm not really familiar with the ins and outs of email tools. So when we're having these in-depth conversations about, we're going to migrate from this email tool to this email tool, I don't have a deep, informed understanding of that. So in that case, when you're managing people that are doing something that's different from your core level of expertise or competency, I think it's about asking the right questions. And so a leader who is perceived to be someone that cares, or someone that's not lazy, as you described, is someone that is like asking the right strategic questions and then helping to stitch it all together. And I think that's how you go about it. But I definitely don't ever want to be perceived as someone in middle management who's just kind of opining all the time in a non-constructive, non-vision setting way.
Yeah. Okay. What have been the best lessons you've learned from other leaders around you?
My role model is a very empathetic leader. And to me, vulnerability is critical if you want to build trust with your team. And I think the era of we're so serious and we're all adults wearing suits and we're all pretending that, we're in this boardroom, and I have this perception of the way the business world used to work. And it kind of feels like everyone was acting a part. And partly because I've been working in tech and partly because I've had some really great leaders, I feel like the path forward is different. And COVID has also changed that. When people show up to work and they say, I'm a human being and here's what's going on in my life and here are the things that I'm struggling with, but here's how I'm going to work on the solution, I think ultimately that builds a lot of trust. And trust is integral to any team's success.
What do you think people misunderstand about the role of leadership today? You kind of touched on it there a bit about kind of having the answers and wearing the suits, but what do you think are the biggest misunderstandings?
I think the biggest misunderstanding of leadership is that you have to have a certain title to be a leader. Like I said before, I think you can be a leader anywhere in an organization by exhibiting leadership traits. And that's a virtuous cycle, because no matter where you are in the organization, if you exhibit leadership traits, you will then ultimately get the opportunity to be a leader and rise in the ranks. And so I think everyone should think of themselves as someone who is a leader and someone who can be a leader. And it's about, what are the building blocks that you're trying to build? I want to be really good at giving concise feedback. I want to be really good at storytelling. I want to be good at connecting the dots to share a strategic vision, not just focusing on tactical execution. I want to think about who are all the stakeholders across the organization that need to be sitting around this table right now? How do I bring them together? How do I build relationships with them? Data. Impact matters. Let's make sure we're bringing in the right data. When we launch something, we're evaluating the performance. So these are all building blocks of being a good leader, and anyone can work on those regardless of their title. And so I think my message is that leadership is not just people that sit in the C-suite or sit in the boardroom. So many people can be leaders, and people should embrace that.
Amazing, thank you. It's my last question. How have we been able to help you the most in our time working together over the last couple of years?
What a great question. So We, the Mozilla marketing team, have been working with The Mix for a year and a half on a variety of different projects across our portfolio. So at a Mozilla brand level, Firefox, the browser, Mozilla VPN and the privacy and security space, and then Pocket, our content saving and discovery app. And not only have we worked with you on a variety of different products, but also tackling really different business questions with each of the projects. So we've talked and worked holistically on how does the brand fit into the marketplace and fit into the competition. So that's kind of more of this brand work and competitive intelligence piece. We've worked on pricing strategies for VPN. We've worked on kind of messaging and what are the key value props and use cases that we should be focusing on. We have looked at what are strategic ways to bundle our products. And so I think that the key piece here is that The Mix has been really great at being adaptable to different types of problems, different products, different business models, and also different methodologies to adapt to our needs. We need a quick turnaround quant survey. We need a deep dive with qual interviews and quant. We need an ethnographic study where we follow these people around. We need a workshop. And every time that we work together, I think we're getting smarter together about how do we identify the gaps? How do we identify the next project that will answer a new set of questions? And I think more than other agencies that I've worked with before, it's not transactional. So it's not, here's the brief, go do that quant survey, get the results back, and call it a day. I think we've really been building a relationship that puts The Mix in a position to help us with our business strategy and really do this important work of taking the insights, taking the research, making them actionable, making them shareable within the organization, and leveraging them as a foundation for strategic discussions and decisions. So a lot of different types of work that has been really impactful and really exciting.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time together, Michelle.
Of course.
Really appreciate it. That is the end of this conversation on Divergent. Thank you.
Thank you.